Well, I've got to tell you, I'm just about graduation out. Last Sunday I had the chance to speak at the Weir High Baccalaureate, and on Friday I worked the soundboard for the Children's Academy 4-year-old preschool graduation, and yesterday Curl had his graduation party right here at the church. And I'm not even counting all the pictures I've liked on Facebook with kids I know wearing caps and gowns. I feel emotionally drained. But not because I didn't enjoy being involved in the stuff I just listed. And by the way, Jessica Fraga, the buffalo dip was great. No, that's not it at all. On Friday, Maggie, you remember little Maggie, that little 5-year-old who came here, a little less than 13 years ago? You remember Maggie, about 12 years ago? Maggie became a Weir High senior. And I just aged 10 years in 24 hours. I feel rode hard and put away wet. Of course, I recognize that what I'm feeling is actually nothing. Not when you compare it with all those folks who've lost sons and daughters, brothers and sisters in combat. Something we're going to remember tomorrow. You see, even though I may be feeling some emotional stress as my daughter grows up, those men and women face challenges that frankly I can't imagine. My gosh, not because of anything they'd done. They were forced to deal with one of those horrible, horrible consequences of war. They had to let go without ever having the chance to say goodbye. Now that was the challenge they faced. And so as we remember those men and women who paid the ultimate price, I also think it's important to remember those who faced the ultimate challenge. And that seems appropriate this morning because as we move through the appearances made by Jesus after the resurrection, we're going to be talking about challenges, and in particular, the challenges he made to his disciples and to Peter. And through them, the ones he makes to us right here and right now. Of course, to get to this place, we've talked about some of the other appearances he made and the other lessons he taught. For example, we looked at the commission he gave in Matthew and the revelation he offered in Luke. We considered the promise he made also in Luke and the inspiration he literally breathed into his disciples according to the evangelist John. And this morning we're going to look at another appearance he made in the Gospel of John, this one by the Sea of Galilee, the Lake of Tiberias. And we're going to focus on two challenges he made, one to the disciples and the other to Peter. Challenges that are just as important for us as they were for them. And I'll tell you, the first one was right at the beginning of John 21. You see, in this part of the story, I believe Jesus challenged the faith of his disciples. Just listen to what John wrote. Jesus later appeared to his disciples along the shore of Lake Tiberias, that's the Sea of Galilee. Simon Peter, Thomas the twin, Nathanael from Cana in Galilee, and the brothers James and John were there together with 2 other disciples. Simon Peter said, "I'm going fishing." The others said, "We'll go with you." And they went out in the boat, but they didn't catch a thing that night. Now, that's what he wrote. And with the scene set and the characters introduced, John continued. Early the next morning, Jesus stood on the shore, but the disciples did not realize who he was. Jesus shouted, "Friends, have you caught anything?" "No," they answered. So he told them, "Let your net down on the other side of the boat, and you will catch some fish." Now, that's what Jesus said. And even though there's no indication in the text that at this point they knew it was the risen Lord, their faith, I believe, their trust was still being challenged. And even though doing what the guy on the beach suggested makes about as much sense as trying to lasso a dinosaur, they trusted the directions of the shepherd whose voice they knew so well. And I'll tell you, with that trust, not only came success, but a new awareness. Again, just listen. They did, and the net was so full of fish they could not drag it up into the boat. Jesus' favorite disciples told Peter, "It's the Lord." When Simon heard that it was the Lord, he put the clothes that he had taken off while he was working. Then he jumped into the water. The boat was only about 100 yards from shore, so the other disciples stayed in the boat and dragged in the net full of fish. Then when the disciples got into the boat, they saw some bread and a charcoal fire with fish on it. Jesus told his disciples, "Bring some of the fish you have just caught." Simon Peter got back into the boat and dragged the net to shore. In it were 103 large fish, but still the net did not rip. Jesus said, "Come and eat." But none of the disciples dared to ask who he was. They knew he was the Lord. Jesus took the bread in his hands and gave it to his disciples. He did the same with the fish. This was the third time that Jesus appeared to his disciples after he was raised from death. You see, Jesus challenged their faith, their willingness to trust. And those disciples passed with flying colors. But like I said a little earlier, I think there were two challenges in this story, and the second one was directed just at Peter. And it was a challenge to what was at the center of his dedication. And even though his response was still lacking, the result was both surprising and comforting. But to understand what's happening here, I've got to shift to my own translation of the Greek, and I'll tell you why. In these verses, there are two different words that are, for some reason, translated love in every English version I know. The first word is phileo, and this word refers to the emotion of love. You know, it's like living in the city of brotherly love, Philadelphia. Everybody loves one another. Or loving everything French, a Francophile. Or loving cowboys fighting dinosaurs, a Valley of Jumanji-phile. It's purely emotional. And for that reason, in my translation, I use the word like. But the other word used in the passage is agapeo. And I'll tell you, that word has nothing to do with feelings at all. Instead, it involves actions and attitudes that result from a decision to love. You see, it was a word that Paul used when he described the kind of love we all need to show. He wrote, "Love is kind and patient, never jealous, boastful, proud, or rude. Love isn't selfish or quick-tempered. It doesn't keep a record of wrongs with others. Love rejoices in the truth, but not in evil. Love is always supportive, loyal, hopeful, and trusting. Love never fails." This is agapeo, and in what we're about to read, I translate it love. And with that distinction in mind, just listen to this conversation in which Jesus challenges Peter's dedication. John wrote, Then when they'd eaten their breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Simon said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I" what? "Like you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said to him a second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Simon said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I like you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you like me?" Peter was saddened because Jesus said to him a third time, "Do you like me?" And Simon said to him, "Lord, all things you know that I like you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." You see, twice Jesus gave Peter the opportunity to say that he was willing to respond to Jesus in a way that demonstrated love. And twice Peter told Jesus that he felt love for him emotionally. I mean, it's a little like a friend fixing you up on a blind date. And when you ask, "Is she pretty?" he says, "Well, she's got a great personality." "Is she pretty?" "Well, she's really funny." "Does she have a nice personality?" "Yes, of course she has a great personality." In other words, Peter stated as clearly as he could that his relationship with Jesus was grounded in the feeling of love, not the decision to love. And if that had been different, if Peter had been willing to make the decision and to show love even when he didn't feel it, Jesus gave him two pretty difficult assignments: to feed lambs, which is not easy, and to tend sheep, a 24-hour job. But of course, as he admitted himself, these were things Peter wasn't yet able to do. And then finally, in the last exchange, Jesus asked Peter something to which he could say, "Yes, I do." He asked, "Do you like me?" And when Peter said, Lord, all things you know that I like you. You know that I emotionally feel close to you. You know that you're my buddy. What a friend I have in Jesus. Jesus still gave him a job to do. He didn't condemn him. He didn't put him down. He didn't say, you better work on your attitude, son. He gave him a job to do, one that was by far the easiest of the three, to feed his sheep. And I'll tell you, I think that's important, because when Jesus challenged Peter to look within himself and to define his sense of dedication as honestly as he could, and Peter found that it was grounded in an emotion he felt rather than a decision he'd made, Jesus still gave him an assignment. He still gave him a job. And for me, that's remarkable. You see, in this story, along with challenging their faith, Jesus also challenged Peter's dedication. And I'll tell you why that's important to us right here and now. Whether we like it or not, both our faith and dedication are constantly being challenged. In other words, over and over again, we find ourselves in situations, usually ones over which we have limited control, and we have a decision to make. We can either trust that God is in charge and that his will is going to be accomplished and that our destinies are in his gracious and merciful and compassionate hands. We can decide to trust God. Or we can worry. And we can whine and we can gripe and we can make our lives and the lives of those around us absolutely miserable. That's our choice. Using the metaphor, the image in this passage, our faith is challenged when we're told to throw our nets on the other side of the boat. And we can either do it and then strain to bring in all the fish we caught, or not do it. Because let's face it, it's stupid to do. It doesn't make any sense. And then we can spend the rest of the day complaining about not catching any fish. Maybe blame one another for making too much noise on the boat. You see, when our faith is challenged, we have a choice. And I think the same is true with our dedication. I mean, we can ground our whole relationship with Jesus on our feelings. You know on what? You know what I mean? I believe in Jesus because he makes me feel happy. Or I believe in Jesus because he makes me feel comfortable. Or I believe in Jesus because he makes me feel important. You see, I love Jesus, but my love is filio. Or we can decide to work a little agapeo into our faith. In other words, we can decide to trust God. We can decide to follow Jesus even if we're not getting what we want or think we should be getting. And we can decide to give people more than we think they've earned and to treat them better than we think they deserve. And rather than craving the spotlight for all the good that we've done, and we've really done it, we can decide to work behind the scenes so that someone else might get the recognition and attention that often falls on us. You see, instead of being right, we can decide to be patient and kind and to demonstrate love. And if we're able to pull that off, if that's what we've decided to do, then we're able to claim the difficult work God has called those whose love is active. But if we're not, and right now our love for Jesus isn't any deeper than what we might feel, well, we can still share the gospel and further the kingdom. You see, even when our dedication is challenged and we come up short, God has still given us a job to do. And we know that because of what John wrote in this story. You see, just like Jesus challenged the faith of his disciples and the dedication of Peter, he also challenges us. And if we choose to trust him, we'll be in a position to see the miraculous happen. And if after looking within ourselves, we can develop the kind of love that's grounded in a decision rather than an emotion, we can do the hard work. But until that time comes, we still have a job to do. And this awareness comes from the challenges found in this passage. And next week we tie up this series by turning to Acts and focusing on the importance of the ascension. Amen.